The Ontario Progressive Conservatives are under fire about the Greenbelt development, and here is why anyone who's focused solely on protecting green space is out of touch with the realities plaguing our province and our country as a whole, because it turns out that you just can't have your cake and eat it too.
Premier, at what point do you take personal responsibility here, and how are people to have trust in your leadership?
Well, thank you for that, Colin, and I'm sure you just walked down the street from your home, that you have a home. But do you know how many people don't have a home, Colin? There's hundreds of thousands of people that there's hundreds of thousands of people that don't have homes.
I'm Tamara Ugolini reporting for Rebel News that earlier this month, Premier of Ontario Doug Ford's government was under fire after what was being called a scathing report by Ontario's Auditor General. Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk accused the Ford government of favoring developers and landowners and claimed that they had direct access to Housing Minister Stephen Clark's Chief of Staff, Ryan Amato, who has since resigned.
More troubling still, the process was biased in favor of certain developers and landowners who had timely access to the Housing Minister's Chief of Staff. Owners of the 15 land sites removed from the Greenbelt could ultimately see more than a collective $8.3 billion increase to the value of their properties.
But that wasn't enough. You see, reporters and others are pressuring and pressing Premier Ford about his handling of the Greenbelt and this land swap and its potential development. And the Premier recently had a feisty but fitting response. Have a listen.
What people are seeing here after this Integrity Commissioner and Auditor General's report is nothing but incompetence, right? From the Chief of Staff who decided to rush through a process, to the Housing Minister who looked away because he thought it was going to be too politically sensitive, to a Premier who directed his Housing Minister to open up the Greenbelt after promising Ontarians that you would never touch the Greenbelt. But Premier,
okay.
at what point do you take personal responsibility here, and how are people to have trust in your leadership?
Well, thank you for that, Colin, and I'm sure you just walked down the street from your home, that you have a home. But do you know how many people don't have a home, Colin? There's hundreds of thousands of people There's hundreds of thousands of people that don't have homes. And yes, 2018, we didn't have a housing crisis. Do you know why we didn't have a housing crisis, Colin? Because there was no jobs here. People weren't coming here. Because the last government lost 300,000 jobs. There was no interest in coming to Ontario. But now, since we've been in office, we've created an environment and condition for people around the world to come to Ontario. Let me finish, Colin. To come to Ontario. When we have a housing crisis, I have two options, Colin. I sit back like the other government did and let the whole province fall apart, or we move forward and we build homes. Because I know you, Colin, a year down the road, if we don't have the homes, you're the first person that's going to be up here saying, why didn't you build the homes? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, Colin, guess what? We're going to build homes. We're going to build homes until people have the same opportunity that you have. You have a nice home down the street. But guess what? There's hundreds of thousands of people that don't have your opportunity, that don't have the good paying job that you have. That's the difference.
Ford refers to 2018 when he explicitly stated that he would not touch the Greenbelt, which actually came a year after his government did touch the Greenbelt and they amended the boundaries, the same thing that they're trying to do now. But we'll get to all of that in a minute because here, I want you to take this trip down memory lane. Here's a clip of Ford in 2018.
Unequivocally, we won't touch the Greenbelt. Unlike other governments that don't listen to people, I've heard it loud and clear. People don't want me touching the Greenbelt. We won't touch the Greenbelt. We'll figure out how to clean up this housing mess and this housing crisis that we're facing in a different fashion. But all my friends, I listen to you. You don't want me touching the Greenbelt. We won't touch the Greenbelt.
Well, Ford clearly relayed in that clip that there was a housing crisis in 2018. It leaves many wondering, that was 6 years ago. What's changed since then? Well, of course, we know now that the unreasonably high number of immigrants coming into Canada has changed, with seemingly little infrastructure or tangible strategic programming in place to support them. Hear me out. According to the Government of Canada's most recent annual report, Canada is on track to intake 465,000 immigrants this year in 2023, another 485,000 by the end of 2024, and 500,000 by 2025, with total ranges exceeding those amounts by 40 to nearly 60,000 additional people per year. And of those nearly 1.5 million people over the next few years, Ontario will attract almost half of them. In 2022 alone, Ontario received over 227,000 immigrants. It's been that way since at least 2001, according to this chart from Statistics Canada. You can see that Ontario, as the blue line, outpaces every other jurisdiction in Canada by at least half. StatsCan further confirms that Ontario attracts the most immigrants, but also loses the most non-permanent residents. Interesting. Data from Statista shows that immigration shot up exponentially in Ontario in 2021/2022. When pressed about the issue, here is what Premier Ford had to say about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's immigration targets. Have a listen.
You know, in the last election, we didn't have a housing crisis. And just up to a few months back, I didn't know the federal government was going to bring in over 500,000. Now we learn that those aren't accurate numbers. It's probably up to 800,000 are arriving. Like, I didn't get a phone call from the minister. I didn't get a phone call from the prime minister saying, surprise, surprise, we're dropping these many people into your province. And by the way, good luck, you deal with them. That's the reason we have to make sure that we use every tool in our toolbox to build homes. So I ran on getting it done. I ran on building homes, making sure that we're building transit and infrastructure in schools and hospitals. And guess what, folks? We're the only government. We do what we say we're going to do. Some people may not like it, but we're going to get it done.
So if the targets are an underestimation and they're already heavily inflated, unlike anything that we have seen before, then where do those newcomers end up? Well, it turns out mostly in Toronto, since it's the Canadian city with the highest number of immigrants arriving every year. In 2021/2022, Toronto received nearly 160,000 immigrants. That's nearly 3/4 of the entire province's immigration numbers, funneling primarily into one major city. And thus, it sprawls the population out into the Greater Toronto Area, also called the GTA, which is exactly where the Greenbelt is located. It's urban sprawl. We've all heard the term before. Now, this urban sprawl is conflicting with Ontario's Greenbelt, which is the world's largest protected green space with 2 million hectares of lush farmlands, forest, wetlands, and watersheds. It's said to act as the heart and the lungs of the GTA. The Greenbelt includes over 800,000 hectares of land that extends 325 kilometers from the eastern end of the Oak Ridges Moraine near Rice Lake in the east to the Niagara River in the west. It's the heart of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The Greenbelt Act was passed in 2005 that delegates protection and land use designations for the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt Plan of 2017 more clearly defines this, stating that it's, quote, meant to establish a land use planning framework for the GGH, that's the Greater Golden Horseshoe, that supports a thriving economy, a clean and healthy environment, and social equity, end quote. On page 95 of the 98-page plan, it shows settlements of development within the protected areas comprising of towns and hamlets. Then, in 2022, the Ford Conservatives amended the act and essentially swapped out land. The map here shows removals from the protected countryside, which is all in and around the GTA. And if you scroll down, you can see the map which shows additions to the urban river valley area. Interestingly enough, the Ford government also did this in 2017. For the record, they added and removed protected areas extensively. Was there opposition, uproar, and the wrath of media hoisted at Ford then? I don't recall. And so it goes. The further out one sprawls, the less infrastructure there is in place to support things like housing, transportation, and amenities, which are all things that are necessary for newcomers just starting out in a new country. So Ontario and Ontarians, what gives? If we want to receive the vast majority of the Trudeau government's absolutely astonishingly high immigration targets, then where do we house them?
And I'll be blunt as well. Housing isn't a primary federal responsibility. It's not something that we have direct carriage of.
And if we want to protect our green spaces, then How do we still meet those immigration targets and expectations?
That young families, the first-time home buyers, have access to the housing market. That's why addressing supply is so unbelievably important. Our population is growing faster than the supply of housing.
And get out of the housing crisis. You can't have your cake and eat it too. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Canadians are grappling with news blackouts on social media due to the Justin Trudeau Liberal government's Bill C-18. This new piece of legislation demands that social media platforms pay the government for news shared by users, which is an inconceivable task for companies like Meta and Google. So, as a result, they have decided to preemptively block all Canadian news content, including ours at Rebel News. In response to this, we have since teamed up with VPN provider Private Internet Access to ensure that you can continue to access all of our content across a broad range of platforms while also maintaining your privacy. For only $2 a month, you can bypass Trudeau's new censorship laws while you safeguard freedom of speech and continue to get the news that matters to you the most. Visit piavpn.com/rebelnews to take advantage of the 84% discount and 4 months free. As a bonus, PIA has all of its servers located in the United States, not China, and they automatically delete user data from their servers to avoid leaks and government subpoenas for information phishing expeditions. Don't delay. Head over to piavpn.com/rebelnews to stay up to date on the news in Canada and protect your access to it. Don't delay. You don't want to be left behind.